Hello lovelies, I don't know what's going on with my channel lately, but it's doing well. Of course, now I've mentioned something, it's probably jinx it, but I figure the best thing to do is to ride this sudden algorithmic turnaround into the ground. So have another video. Today we're looking at Ferocious Fighters, Factions in Action Volume 1 for the G.I. Joe RPG. We played a session of that, a one-shot, over on the Grimstreams channel if you want to check it out. It's an Essence 20 system. That's the same one that they use for the Power Rangers RPG and the Transformers RPG, and the core system is the same in each instance, by and large, with a few little tweaks here and there. You'll see a lot of similarities, and in theory they can all cross over, but the size differences and things might make that a little bit difficult. Essence 20 as a system is good enough. And, yeah, if you want to see reviews of that, you can see my Transformers or G.I. Joe reviews elsewhere on the channel. But this is about factions, and suitably, given that we have the Cobra Codex out as well now that lets you play Cobra characters, it is fairly evenly split between different factions. Chapter 1 says Beyond G.I. Joe vs. Cobra, but it doesn't really go into that. You're not going to see the October Guard described here. You're not going to see the Red Shadows described here. It's still G.I. Joe and Cobra, but these are subsets, specialists, special versions of certain G.I. Joe characters. So this book details Tiger Force, who use repurposed Cobra vehicles and weapons, because, you know, it's a cheap way to sell toys. Use the same molds and paint them slightly differently. But the idea of them being like an insurgency behind enemy lines sort of force, that's a nice idea. And Cobra's Python Patrol, who are supposed to be stealthy and sneaky. So again, for selling toys, this was a repaint or a slightly different accessory. A new hat. But conceptually, that works quite well. And then Chapter 4 is some other factions, or what I like to call the big bag of bogus bullshit. This is where you'll find a bit more information on things like Cobra-La, mega monsters, dinosaurs, and other nonsense. So if you're playing a more hardcore, like the comics, like Warren Ellis's brief run on G.I. Joe, or some of the more adult cartoons, then that's this section. And if you're more into the cartoon and the more sort of bombastic Saturday morning nonsense, and the makers desperately trying to compete with other things that were popular with slightly younger kids over the years, then this is the side for you. It's a resource book. It's mostly useful stuff. There's some expanded information on contacts that were detailed in the Cobra Codex. There's a few new influences and general perks that you can pick up on. Perks operate much like feats in D&D. Tiger Force are meant to be this kind of roughest, toughest, behind enemy lines, using captured equipment, but then they go and paint it all, bright yellow with tiger stripes, which kind of defeats the object in a lot of ways. But when you're selling toys, that's fine. You can suspend disbelief there. So you have new influence there, new options for various character types, contacts, expanding the contacts rules more into the G.I. Joe territory, some information on the Tiger Force versions of some of the characters, some of the extra special abilities they get for being part of Tiger Force, and so on, as well as some NPCs. So if you want to throw sort of generalized enemies, generalized versions of the named characters against your Cobra characters without necessarily wiping out key important G.I. Joe members, then you've got options for doing that there, as well as the Tiger Force versions of some G.I. Joe and some Cobra vehicles. So if you want to use Cobra vehicles with your G.I. Joe characters, or in some cases vice versa, there you go. Yeah, and some more perks and stuff. Look, this is options. These are all options, and these are sub-specialized forces and so on. So this is expanding the scope and the potential and the development routes of the various characters that you might be playing. I find the Essence 20 rules a bit random, so character builds aren't perhaps necessarily as important as they might be in other games, but even so, it's nice to have a lot more options. Then we have Python Patrol. This is the Cobra infiltration team. They make great use of stealth technology and so on. We have some new influences that make it sound like Metal Gear Solid, Subtle Snake, Sneaky Snake, Metal Snake, stuff like that. We have some new options like Force Recon and so on. Some nice artwork of cool looking Vipers. Some expansions on contacts. Just more stuff and more example soldiers who could be Python Patrol that you can throw at your G.I. Joe characters. So yeah, more and more options. Some additional vehicles or vehicle options. So this is specialized, cheaply modified molds for making the plastic vehicles, but hey ho, there you go. It is what it is. Business is business. Some new equipment and so on. Like I say, it's all options. Right, then we get into the big book of bogus bullshit, where we find a modicum of information about such groups as Cobra-La, Dino Hunters. I mean, you can tell just from the logos that this is aimed at a slightly more childish audience than a tween or teen audience. But that doesn't mean that you can't potentially turn these things around into being more useful if you're running a more serious comics-oriented campaign. It pumps everything up to the extreme, which I guess if you're going for a bombastic 80s campaign is fine. And then we have some stat sheets for various things from Cobra-La, like the Royal Guard, Globulus himself, Pythona, who's perhaps the most interesting of them. It's a big book of options and stat blocks and other things that you might find useful. Not sure how useful you might find dinosaurs, but we have a couple of popular ones here. Triceratops, Tyrannosaurus Rex. From that you can build back or forward to various other versions, and there's options for new vehicles and so on as well. So it's a big book of options. It's pretty much all content. So let's give it a score. It's perhaps a little slim for the money at under 100 pages. The hardback's kind of unnecessary as well. It is, however, just the book, which I think is good. Things like Sergeant Slaughter, that was put out as a kind of limited edition thing that you can get the PDF separately, which is probably more worthwhile, but at least they didn't put this out with figures and other things to drive the price up and fleece the collector's market, which is where I think they're aiming the G.I. Joe RPG. I think it's very much aimed at people who played with these toys as kids and got caught up in the lore and so on, and ended up really interested in them in that way. That's who I think they're aiming for, the more serious side. So the back end of this is perhaps less useful than the rest, but yeah, it's fun. In terms of style, the artwork's pretty good. There's a few standout pieces, there's a few pieces that aren't so good. I appreciate the fact that there's strong lines and good contrast, and it's not wishy-washy, muddy pastel tones. Some pieces stand out as being better than others, perhaps a little more childish looking than some of the other books, but it's in keeping with the content. So style, high 3, bordering on a 4, because this is kind of the level that we expect from Renegade on this particular line. So yeah, it's not exceptional, but it does the job. In terms of substance, it's a little bit odd that you have half the book being fairly detailed synopses and options and rules and so on for two somewhat serious factions, and then you have the other half of the book kind of skirting rapidly over a bunch of big bogus bullshit factions. So the utility, I mean, it's all options and stuff. Even the nonsense options, they have twists and turns that you could make them more useful in a more straight campaign. Even so, that's going to knock it down to a low 4 in terms of substance. So that's 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5, slightly above average. If you are going to run a G.I. Joe campaign for any longer period of time, like more than 6 sessions, then this is probably a good thing to go for, to pick it up, to round out the options for both your Cobra and your G.I. Joe factions. So yeah, worthwhile. Just hopefully the other faction books will be along the same model. Zang.
Daikaiju Dai is a game about beating up monsters in giant mecha. The players take the part of mecha pilots and their support crew, using the fate system to allow the one to influence the other. They will fight giant monsters and walk in their shadow. They will establish rivalries and defeat villains. They will uncover conspiracies and lead the fight back against what seems to be a world itself in rebellion against humanity. Mostly, though, they'll smash giant monsters to pieces in epic, destructive fights. Available from post-mort.com, lulu.com and DriveThruRPG.